All right. So, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Vendetta Sports Media Daily Show alongside Andrew McGinnis. I'm Chris Bagdonis. How are you doing, Andrew?
I am doing well, Chris. We were just talking. It's been busy college semesters for both of us, so I haven't gotten to do as much Vendetta stuff as I wish I could have so far. So
Agreed.
it's be able to do this.
Definitely. And considering we both have hockey as our strong suit, I feel like that's a great place to start. We've seen some pretty good trades going down recently. Obviously, the trade deadline is still a couple weeks away, but I guess I'll leave it to you, Andrew. Is there any deal that in particular, the Ryan O'Reilly or Tarasenko, that really stood out to you that has gone on?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, when's the last time we saw 3 first-round picks traded with still like a week and a half to go before the trade deadline? I mean, we usually see like 1, maybe 2 big trades before the deadline, or like the days leading up to it, but it's just weird to see so many big trades. I think it's a good thing, definitely, because I mean, you compare the NHL trade deadline to the NBA trade deadline, and like most
Totally.
things, the NBA runs circles around it. Um, but yeah, I just think it's really interesting to see all those guys in the move, obviously. And you have the Blues, I think, are a really interesting team with the fact that they've traded O'Reilly, they've traded Tarasenko, who are their 2 big trade chips, but now they're supposedly in on Timo Meier. And I do think
Yeah,
it makes sense a little bit. It's not totally off base, but it also kind of reminds me of the concerns a lot of people had when Ottawa got Alex DeBrincat last
that's right.
offseason. Everyone being like, "Oh yeah, you got this great player, but what's going to stop him from bowling in 2 seasons?" For those who don't know, Myers an RFA at the end of the year, but he's got a $10 million qualifying offer, so you could easily accept that and become a UFA at the end of next season. So I do think it kind of makes sense because I don't think the Blues need to rebuild. I feel like, a lot of teams, especially the one I cheer for, that need rebuilds and say, like, no, we can retool. And a lot of them are just not in position to be able to do that with any sort of like speed or end success. The Blues are a team. You look at some of the forwards they have with Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, Pavel Buchnevich. Um, Ivan Barbashev is another guy who's a good player, and they also trade
Right.
him and get a high draft pick as well, at least a second, I would think.
I would
Maybe
think
like a
so.
conditional first if someone's really getting aggressive, but they're the rare team I feel like that could pull off a retool and it be the right decision for them to make rather than
Yeah.
going all in or all out.
Absolutely, and it's to your point. I think that Timo Meyer absolutely fits their timeline in terms of you look at Pavel Buchnevich, you look at Thomas and Kyrou. Like I don't know all their ages off the top of my head, but compared to Vladimir Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly, who are both on the wrong side of 30, that would be a very good retool. And it's funny that you use that term, and the first team that as an Islanders fan, it hurts me to say the Rangers are a team that really comes to mind when I think about a retool. I think about, I know Tortorella just put out kind of the letter to the fans about, there might be some tough times ahead. And I know the Rangers did that not too long ago. And now they have arguably as good a shot to win the East as, that second tier below, you'd say, Boston and Carolina. They're right in the mix with the Devils, the Maple Leafs, the Lightning, all of them, if not a step above. And I think the Tarasenko move's a great indicator of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's going to be so good with Panarin. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just a perfect fit.
And also, something really weird I saw on Twitter is like apparently Patrick Kane may circle back to the Rangers as a possible trade destination, and that would be I don't even know the feasible like framework of a deal at that point. What kind of salary would be retained, what the Blackhawks would want back for him from the Rangers, but that would be like a wild move.
Yeah, it definitely would be. I mean, Kane makes 10 and a half, so Chicago could retain 50% of that, and then another team could jump in and retain 50% of that. Um, so you've got
That's what the
potentially
Wild did, right?
2.625. And yes, that
Two
is what
points,
happened
yeah.
with O'Reilly. Minnesota jumped in and they retained 50% and got like a 4th or 5th round pick. So
Yeah,
it
I
is
mean,
doable,
also,
but I
it's
mean,
a really no. I was just saying, like O'Reilly's had a great start to life in Toronto. Also,
yeah, no kidding. Last night, I mean, it's going to be interesting for them to figure out what they want to do with their lines because they've got Tavares on the wing right now. I mean, they could just stack their center core if they
yeah,
wanted to. And I mean, they've got Matthew Knies, who's a really good prospect, left winger, who's going to sign probably late March or so whenever his collegiate season ends. So maybe
yeah,
that changes the calculations a little bit. But I mean, they've decided to load up the top 6 for now with Tavares on the wing. And I mean, it worked out pretty well for them last
Yeah,
time.
so far so good. Yeah, totally.
the one
And yeah, it'll
loss
be
was- I know it
interesting
was-
to see.
Yeah, I know the one loss was to Chicago, but it was the second half of back-to-back. So
Yeah.
with travel, so that's understandable.
You gotta take that into account. And I must say, Andrew, if this does not win the or the Maple Leafs at least one single playoff series, I do not know what will.
I don't know. I mean, the thing with Toronto is they could like still go out and get someone feasibly too.
Oh
Like, I know,
yeah, I think
Jake
the
Dave's been tossed
defenseman.
around a little bit as someone they can maybe get
Totally.
as a defenseman. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see. Also with their goalie situation as well, with Matt Murray going in LTIR.
Yeah,
I guess Samsonov's the guy. Like that's what it seems like at this point. And I mean, he's been pretty good for them this season. So like, could he win a playoff series? Yeah, I think he'll win a playoff series.
I think so.
Could he win a cup? I'm a little less certain on that, but I don't know. I mean, when you have a team as good as Toronto's is in front of him on paper, you always have a shot, really. And I mean,
That's right.
I feel like people forgot kind of with Samsonov that he used to be one of the most highly touted prospects in the NHL as of like a couple of years ago with Washington when he was coming up through their ranks. And he had a pretty good rookie season in 2019-20. And then last 2 years fell off a little bit, was kind of in a weird spot with, Washington losing Holtby, and maybe he just wasn't ready to become a full-time starter at that point. But he's really
There's
found his
potential
groove in Toronto. So
Totally.
yeah, what they do.
And I was thinking, like, you're right. I remember a few years ago, a lot of people had him in that Shesterkin and Sorokin bracket of those young, intriguing Russian goalies. Obviously it didn't really pan out for him in Washington, and even now with the Caps, the transition from Braden Holtby hasn't exactly been seamless, to say the least. But I think he's in a good spot. Obviously, I can tell you all day as an Islanders fan, I'm sure a team would be happy to pay up for Semyon Varlamov. I know he's on an expiring deal, and he could, I again, as an Islanders fan, I can't really tell you anything, because the moment you think they're dead in the water, they'll get 2 wins on a home and home against the Penguins. And, I'm not saying anything because they have so many games played. There's going to be Buffalo catching up, Detroit, the Caps when Ovi gets back. I know his father passed away. Very, very sad stuff. But, I think they could potentially become sellers. But obviously, like you said, it's a week and a half until the deadline. So it's tough.
It's nice to see the East just in general compared to what it was last year. We knew the playoff teams last year from like Christmas out, maybe even like Thanksgiving, basically.
Yeah.
And this year, I mean, you've got just a total logjam of teams. You've got 5 teams within 6 points of the last playoff spot, and a lot of those teams have games in hand. In fact,
that's right.
All those 5 teams, except for Washington, have at least 4 games in hand on the Islanders and Panthers who currently have spots.
It's going to be a thrilling race.
Yeah, by points percentage, it's actually right now Pittsburgh and Detroit who are in, if you go by that. But obviously, still played both catch up and then the rest.
Keep your buffer yourself. But I saw what's it called? Trey said in the Slack that Detroit has 1 foot in and 1 foot out on selling. I heard Bertuzzi might be kept around in Detroit, which I don't really know if that's the smartest move by Steve Yzerman. Obviously, I thought at face value last offseason, I thought the signings he made were really good, but now obviously things have not quite panned out in Detroit. I'm sure they'd at least like to be in one of the wild card spots rather than on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I mean, they've had a really up and down season. I kind of mirrored last year at the start where they got off to a really good beginning and then they fell off hard last year. And it looked like that was going to kind of happen again this year, but they've really been able to turn it around over the last month or so. I like most of their moves in the offseason too, especially up front. The Sherratt one, I was less kind of, to say the least. And I think we've been proven right on that one.
Yeah.
But overall,
just about
this isn't like a must make the playoffs year for Detroit. I think as long as they're competitive, through into like early April or so, or late March, I think Yzerman will take that with where they are and the young guys that they have. You have to remember too as well that Dylan Larkin's a UFA. So I wonder if the Bertuzzi decision, I'm sure it works somewhat in hand with Larkin and whether or not, what their cap situation might be, depending on what kind of extension that Larkin signs. If he does sign one, it's weird to think he could be somewhere else. I feel like he's one of those guys who just associate with one team, but I mean, crazier things have happened
that's right.
As you can attest to.
I mean, it is exactly what you said. Like, you kind of can't imagine him wearing anything else except a Red Wing sweater. I've seen Trey kind of lobbying the Bruins to make a move for him, and I think as of right now this season, everything the Bruins touch has turned to gold so far. But it'll be quite a whopper of a trade deadline. Because I was also wanting to pick your brain about Erik Karlsson, and he's obviously with that still a huge contract of his, obviously on a career year. Like, what do you think the most realistic outcome of Erik Karlsson is?
I think he's staying put. Honestly, I just don't think the salary game. I just don't think it's going to work out between all the teams that could potentially realistically acquire him, and what San Jose is willing to retain. If I'm the Sharks, honestly, I'm willing to do basically whatever it takes to get out from this deal because,
Of course,
I mean, and I say whatever it takes. I mean, in the sense like you're going to get assets for him at this point with the way he's playing. You're going to get at least a first, I would imagine, probably a little bit more, if maybe not even substantially more potentially.
totally.
I mean, like if you would try to trade Erik Karlsson this time last season, I mean, you would have had to give up like 3 firsts for it to even be considered, really. And just the bounce back that he's had is incredible. I saw a tweet saying like we deserve a playoff run with Karlsson and McDavid on the same team.
Oh, of course.
I mean, that would just be incredible, right?
Electrifying.
That's the thing with Karlsson. He's really never gotten to play with a game-breaking forward, I mean, he had Mark Stone in Ottawa, but Stone's more of a two-way guy than like one of the true like a elite, pure skill guy. I think Mark Stone is an elite player, but it's
I know what you mean. But in terms of with the puck on his
how to word it necessarily, but he's not like an elite offensive talent necessarily. I mean, he's very good,
scoring,
a ton of points, but
yeah, of course,
he's more elite because he's really good on offense and he's really good at defense. Not that he's just a superstar on offense like a McDavid or a Leon Draisaitl or one of those guys. But yeah, I mean, I would love to see Karlsson get to play with a guy like that. And obviously in San Jose, like, I mean, Timo Meier is good. Logan Couture is good. Who are the other guys that they've had?
Yeah, I'm blanking, honestly.
Play with, I mean, Pavelski for 1 year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it, I think, really.
In terms of higher-end players.
High-end forwards, I mean, pretty big drop-off between, like, late career Joe Thornton. I mean.
Yeah, just aging like fine wine, but obviously it's also worth considering will this kind of production, last? Because he's up there in the Cale Makar types of levels of offensive production from the back end. And I also, obviously, he's not on a good team, so I would be interested in seeing what kind of Norris consideration he gets at the end of the season. But I think we could worry about that a little bit later. But
yeah. I mean, I think he's probably the favorite right now. Just the narrative around him.
Oh, of course, yeah.
There.
I agree with that. I mean, obviously the NHL doesn't have really a comeback player of the year award. I know they do. I'm trying to think.
They got the Masterton Trophy. Which essentially is the comeback player. It's not. It's worded a little bit differently. It's someone who displays perseverance and dedication to hockey,
right,
or something along those
sure
lines.
he's nailed on for that.
The facto comeback player of the year.
Yeah. And yeah, so I'll be very interested in seeing, I remember, I guess it was in 2019 when it was announced it was 7 years. So I guess assuming that's until 2026, it'll be interesting in seeing, what kind of takers there are on that deal.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to think like what else we talked about. There's Kane, there's still a lot of great players on the market like Larkin. And, I hope, as hockey fans, we both hope that it can somewhat resemble the NBA in terms of just the sheer volume of trades. But, I'm not going to hold my hope out, but.
Yes, especially with freaking Jacob Chychrun being held captive basically, right?
For almost 2 weeks now. We're out. It's been a pretty long time.
Jacob Chychrun is the new Matt Dumba, good defenseman who is on the trade block for like 7 straight years.
Continuously.
Like, Matt Dumba's been on the block since before Vegas was a team. Like that's
how wild. That is wild. I mean, I'm in terms of like fits. I mean, I remember last year the Bruins went out and got Hampus Lindholm. Obviously, he would still be a great fit on the Bruins, but definitely would be loading up on that back line. I was, Twitter speculation had maybe the Blues. Obviously, they're starting to collect these assets. Would they start to strike something with Arizona? I think that would be an even better retooling, quote unquote, move. But
yeah, especially because Chychrun's 1 under contract, 2 is really way cheaper than whatever Meier gets, and 3 is a bigger positional need for them.
Yeah, and I heard Colton Parayko was also people have been sniffing around. I'm sure the Blues don't want to trade him because it's the first year of his 8-year contract, but still.
Yeah, I mean that's a big contract for Parayko, and he does have no trade clause. So
wow,
That's obviously part of it as well. But yeah, I mean, Pareko was someone who at the start of his career was like, it was kind of an analytical darling, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. The rare analytical darling of who's a defensive defenseman, and then
Yeah.
it seems like you can progress kind of up and down career really. So
after Alex Pietrangelo left St. Louis, I'm sure that didn't really help his case, but still, I think someone will be willing to pay that price, but just a matter of St. Louis, do they want to give him up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you got a 6'6" right-handed defenseman with 82 playoff games. I mean, that's an
doesn't grow on trees.
Manager's fantasy. Yes,
yeah.
He is Rasmus Ristolainen, but with playoff experience, and he was once good.
Oh man, I also got to pick your brain, Andrew. What is your if you were the GM, what is your way out for the Flyers? Like, what are you prioritizing kind of moving forward? Just everything, or a particular, forward, defense, and net? Obviously, also Carter Hart. We could spend all day talking about your views on Carter Hart or certain other players on the Flyers.
Yeah, and Sam Ersson now, the backup. I mean, he's 6-0 and has looked fantastic every time he's been in net. It's so cruel. The team that went through the 2010s with like at times everything but goaltending, or like the late 2000s, 2010s, had everything but goaltending, and now they have nothing except for goaltending.
It is cruel, the NHL. Sometimes
I can appreciate it, but it stinks. With the Flyers, it's just they're in such a bad spot. Like it's really almost impossible to state how bad of a spot it is. Like, right, I think the smartest thing the Flyers could do would be to kind of try to do what the Maple Leafs did in like the mid 2010s, which is like you trade more or less everyone with like decent amount of value, but you leave players who are like veterans who are either on not great contracts, or like some of your like guys who are like in between the current and next generation. Like you leave those guys. Like just looking at the Flyers cap friendly right now, if you traded Travis Konechny, Ivan Provorov, Tony DeAngelo. You probably can't trade Travis Sanheim with his 8-year extension, especially the way he's been playing this season. Like that would be close to enough to take you to the very bottom of the league, I think. I don't know. I'm talking about this year. I'm talking about next season and the season.
Right. Oh, of course.
But that would probably be enough to get you to the point where like, all right, we're not just one of the like 6th worst team in the league now. Now we're the 2nd worst or something like that, which allows you to hopefully get those top prospects. I mean, they could get lucky in the lottery, obviously, but you're more likely to get lucky the worse that you are.
Right.
And then you still have guys left over like Kevin Hayes, Joel Farabee, Scott Lawton. You could be 50-50 on a trade with. I feel like you could maybe get a lot for Lawton. Just that Tortorella speaks about him. He's someone who obviously has a lot of pull in the industry. And I mean,
totally.
Lawton is, we talked about Pareko being general manager's fantasy. Lawton, versatile forward, can play power play, can play penalty kill. He'll score in an okay clip. He's good defensively. He can win faceoffs. I mean, he's a jack of all trades, really.
He's a Swiss Army knife.
Exactly. Yes. So he's someone you could trade, but you could keep as well too. He's actually the only Flyer wearing a letter right now. So I mean, that might be part of the reason why the Flyers want to keep him around. I know they've prioritized building their culture back, which is all well and good, but you also have to get culture is important. But if you don't have the players good enough to turn that culture into victories, then it's kind of just there and being wasted. So I think if you trade Konechny, Provorov, DeAngelo, maybe Lawton, then the team's probably going to be bad enough at that point to where they're going to be in the bottom 3 in the league for the next couple of years. And then when your top prospects from those drafts, come up, they've got veteran players like, those guys, like I mentioned, like Hayes will still be there for 3 more years after this. Couturier is probably going to come back at some point.
Yeah.
Maybe Atkinson does too. You'll still have Sanheim around. You'll still have Ristolainen around for sure. You have those guys to mentor them and at least have somewhat of a base, because I think, we have talked about a lot, like why certain rebuilds are successful and why they aren't. Just comparing where the Maple Leafs were in when they got Austin Matthews to where they got John Eichel. I mean, Matthews had way more support, and so Nylander and Martin, those young guys, like they had James Van Riemsdyk was there, Nazem Kadri, Tyler Bozak, Morgan Riley, Jake Gardner, quality NHL players. And like I'm trying to think back to like the 16, 17 Sabres or so, and I mean they had Kyle Okposo and Kyle Okposo.
I mean, Like maybe like Robin Leonard was still there back in the
Leonard,
day.
and O'Reilly was too. O'Reilly was too. And
Yeah,
Leonard
that's
was
right.
too. I forgot about O'Reilly. Jeez. Yeah,
Yeah,
looking
I
at
know.
the roster, Reinhardt was coming up, but like the veterans that they had were established guys. Evander Kane, gosh, I forgot about.
Oh my gosh, that's a throwback right there.
That is a throwback.
Wow.
Yes. So I mean, the Sabres did have some guys, but I feel like the Maple Leafs just had enough in their tank really to like where they could support the young guys. Some of their depth players as well too. They had more depth in those Sabres teams certainly. And looking at some of the guys like Brian Giunta at 38 years old was 7th on those Sabres in scoring.
Brian Giunta.
Followed closely
my
by 33 from Matt Molson, who's been in the AHL for like the last half.
Molson, Islanders legend Matt Molson, right there. That is a blast from the past.
Was Giunta an Islander too? Am I crazy?
Yes, he was. I think he was like, I guess, a 13th forward or something like that in like 2016, maybe 2015.
I'm looking at him. He actually was, unless he was on the roster and just never played.
Yeah, he may have been in the AHL in Bridgeport.
Am I thinking of a different Giunta? Is there a Steven Giunta?
Steven Giunta. Yes,
that's
Steven
the guy.
Giunta.
That's the guy.
He's the Islander. Yeah, not Brian. Wow.
Yes.
That is really, you are really unlocking some new doors in my brain. That has been like repressed for so many years.
Yes, but this kind of goes back to like where the Flyers, like where their plan supposedly is, and like how they've shied away until recently with the Tortorella letter. And I mean, I don't know if they're still going to commit to a rebuild or not, but it seems way more likely than it did a year ago, which is probably a good thing, I guess. I mean, it'd be better if they were good, obviously.
Yeah,
but
the whole
like you can rebuild and still keep a couple guys around. You don't have to literally trade every single player with any skill whatsoever, but you pick and choose based off your cap situation and your roster timeline with contracts and ages and that sort of stuff. And you pick, all right, who do we think is going to be a fit who is going to be a fit here in 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years when we're building things back up, and who is not going to fit our timeline, whether it's because they're going to be a big extension or they're going to be too old, something like that. So I think that like picking and choosing aspect of a rebuild kind of goes under the radar, but it is an important aspect. And if you don't pick anyone to stay, then it makes it harder to build it back up, obviously.
Yeah, and then you're relying on the draft, which
you obviously have to do, but
a roll of the dice regardless.
You can't expect the kids to do it all themselves.
Yeah. And yeah, it made me think like, obviously, hindsight's 2020, the Flyers probably wouldn't really be in the right position for him, but like the whole Johnny Gaudreau thing, being able to kind of add a big money free agent, but obviously it takes a lot of building up to get to that point and having the young talent on controllable contracts to get
there. As Chuck Fletcher said, he doesn't fit our timeline. What is our timeline? I have no idea. Does anyone? Who knows? But
maybe the Riddler knows or something.
Yeah. The timeline will probably be revealed by whoever Chuck Fletcher's successor is, which I will imagine will happen in the offseason.
Yeah. And I also, even in a managerial timeline, like what's Tortorella's expiration date? It's usually, doesn't go much longer than 2 or 3 years in most stops.
Tortorella is actually a little bit, that is most coaches, but you look at Tortorella, and other than the weird 1 year in Vancouver, he's generally had pretty good staying power. 7 years with the Lightning, 6 with the Rangers, 6 with Columbus. So he's usually had good staying power. And I mean, they literally just hired him. And like Charlie O'Connor of The Athletic made this point on Broad Street Hockey Radio, that it's really interesting that the letter from the fan base came from Tortorella and not from Fletcher or CEO Dave Scott or someone in upper management who, is typically associated with roster construction, which is obviously typically the most associated part of a rebuild, or the most relevant part of a rebuild, because they know that Tortorella has resonated with the fans at least more than Fletcher, which I mean is not that high of a bar to clear, but they know he's a voice that brings more respect to the organization than probably any other right now. And if they're going to keep prioritizing culture, whether they rebuild or not, then I'm expecting that he's going to be at the forefront of that. Why he signed up for that, I still have no idea. But
yeah, I mean, it is worth wondering, but as of right now, I mean, it also makes you think like who would come in and do like a better job. I mean, obviously, the whole Provorov situation with the LGBT stuff, there's going to be headlines that just kind of come up that, that is not really in our control. or not our, Tortorella's control, but I think he can at least steady the ship. And in terms of what you said, kind of the culture side of things, obviously, you know, trusting Chuck Fletcher to build a roster is a completely different matter. But I'll be very interested in seeing what the next few years looks like for the Flyers. Obviously, many, including yourself, predict it won't be very good, but still, I'm going to definitely keep an eye on them and just see how it kind of comes about.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm thinking
out of a playoff spot. So, yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
You
Totally
probably have like 5 games on hand on the Islanders, so anything's possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of what else. Like, I'm thinking of the big names that we kind of predicted in terms of trade wise, and obviously the trades that did happen. I could spend all day talking about Bo Horvat, but I don't feel like that's really. I don't know if that's really worth it. But is there anything you want to go over MLB? Is there anything on your mind that you?
Yeah, I mean, yes, that you should probably saw my face light up there when you mentioned baseball, especially after making me talk about the Flyers for like 10 minutes. I've just been really just all off season, just soaking in what happened with the Phillies.
Yeah.
And spring training too. Like, I'm just in love with every single piece of like spring training content they put out. Like, they've had some mic'd up videos today with Garrett Stubbs and Rangers.
Really?
And I'm just my heart.
I mean,
there's just such a freeing sensation. And it's something that was talked about a lot by myself, by Rob Thompson, by so many other people. When they clinched, when that drought ended, the weight just came off of their shoulders, really. And it freed them up to really reach their ceiling as a team, or, hopefully not quite reach their ceiling, of course. Hopefully their ceiling is 2 wins higher. But I mean, it's just the vibes around the team are different than I remember, because I mean, the last, it's hard. Like, yes, they were good back in like the mid or like late 2000s, early 2010s. And I was too little to like maybe remember this accurately, of course, but the vibes were like, it still feels like they're in kind of the same mode mentally that they were last year, especially for the postseason. And like, they've acknowledged like, hey, that is in the past. They're moving on from stuff. They're not bringing back Dancing on My Own, which I think is a good call, honestly. I want to talk about that too, actually. But the vibes have been good, and just with that point, actually, I always found it weird with like teams like the Blues. I had Gloria, of course, got to the final. As an outsider, I always thought, I don't know why they didn't keep that. You literally, like, you unlocked the code to winning the Stanley Cup. Why would you not keep that?
Yeah.
And I guess it's maybe a little different because the Phillies lost in the World Series, of course. But like, having gone through it, having experienced the emotions of it, I totally get it. Like, you just associate it with so tightly with that one specific moment in time, or that month in time, really. And it just feels weird to kind of drag that out. So I think it's a good thing. I feel like they've achieved a good balance of letting go of what they need to let go of and keeping what they should keep. And I think that's really going to help them this season, especially these first couple months, which are going to be a challenge without Bryce Harper, for sure. But I mean, they proved to themselves last year that they can survive without Harper for a couple months, much like they proved their postseason medal, of course, all throughout October and even into November, which is still crazy to think about. But I'm really excited for that.
Yeah.
The way that you always get excited for opening day. Like, I was excited last year, even after decade in doldrums. What's going to take for them to get out of this? They signed.
It is different this time around for them, though.
It is so different, and I'm sure it's the same for Mariners fans too.
Oh yeah,
to a lesser extent, maybe. To a lesser extent, in some ways, because they didn't have the deep postseason run. But I mean, with just the long drought that they snapped twice as long as the Phillies, in fact,
right?
It is very freeing, and so it's made me a big baseball fan somehow even more excited, which is just a really cool spot.
I mean, it is still like crazy. Like, I still cannot believe like Trey Turner is a Philadelphia Philly. Like, that is just the most like remarkable. Like, I obviously I'm a Yankees fan, so I'll sing my praises to Aaron Judge, but I think Trey Turner to the Phillies was the best move of the offseason in my book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they got better. Like, they lost. They made to the World Series and they got better. Like, you can't ask for too much more from your team with Turner and just with the bullpen additions too.
Taijuan Walker in the starting rotation.
Andrew Painter potentially too as a 19-year-old. That's a really fun story to follow. Yeah, the vibes. The
Like,
vibes.
they could be the
Vibes
story
are
of
good.
baseball, like just the whole like. I'm even, I've a lot of Mets fans in my family, but as a Yankees fan, I've always had respect for the Phillies, and like the Flyers, I just can't wait to see how they shake out because I really think they're gonna. I don't think Atlanta can catch them if they're hot, and I don't think the Mets can catch them if they're hot. The Mets could spend all the money they want, but I just feel
I
like the
mean,
Phillies are just the glue there is just so strong. I think that immediately, obviously, we know Harper and Turner's
yeah,
relationship from the Nationals,
of
and
course.
I just feel like they just that room they're just in a different mental and kind of chemistry level than pretty much everyone else in the National League.
I think they're gonna have a hard time winning the division just because of how strong the Braves and Mets are, and the fact that they are starting with a handicap with Harper out for probably about 3
Yeah,
months.
of course.
So but we proved last season, it matters to win the division, but it's not all encompassing. What matters of most and what gets remembered most is what happens in the postseason. And they've proved that, all we have to do is get in and we know we're capable of taking it from there. And I
Yeah,
feel like their roster construction this year, especially, when Harper comes back and the bullpen additions that they've made, I feel like the bullpen was an underrated part of their postseason run. I remember at the start of the postseason, they said, "Oh, the Phillies are the worst bullpen ERA of any team," and that surprised me to learn because after the first 2 months of the season, once Thompson took over, the bullpen for the most part was very good. It had a rough month or so when Dominguez went down.
right.
They had to push David Robertson farther than he could probably handle at 37, but I think the bullpen showed a lot last season. You've got some new faces in there, of course, in Soto and Kimbrel and Matt Strom, some guys who have some stuff to prove as well, but have also, flashed some tantalizing skill over the course of their career. Obviously, Kimbrel is one of the best closers of the 2010s, looking to get back to that level. Soto is kind of like Jose Alvarado 2.0. And Jose Alvarado 1.0 turned out pretty great for the Phillies after the 2 months or so of last season. And Strom seems like a pretty good guy as well. So just the depth that they have, it's really cool to see them over these last couple of years, really since Dombrowski took over after the 2020 season, just build a more sound organization from the bottom up, like every single level, really, even the minor leagues and their player development and their approach to contracts and whatever, with not having to go to arbitration with anyone, which after the Corbin Burns stuff, and we've always known arbitration can be, testy, but after that,
Oh yeah.
especially, it's a relief and just, it's really cool. It was really cool last fall to see them rewarded, it felt like, for making themselves a much more sound organization, because they came close a couple times in past seasons when the organization was more flawed and they had a chance in 21, but they just had too many injuries, and it was going to take a while to overcome the flaws from the past seasons and kind of
Right.
build the roster back up, and they were still in the process of doing that in 21, and they made some poor personnel choices as well with the bullpen and some of the pitchers they brought in, but it just was really cool to see them kind of
Yeah.
fix their flaws over these last couple seasons and get stronger and make that progression.
Yeah, I mean, it is very impressive, like to see a whole franchise kind of build that, like you just said. It doesn't happen very often. Like
Oh,
people don't like to look at their teams with a clear-eyed view, if you will, or kind of just approach the facts of the situation. We've seen a lot of sugarcoating in sports and a lot of fake news, whatever you want to call it, but like. It's interesting to that, and also a little tangent about like the Eagles also, like they have also really redeveloped the whole pretty much system so quickly, bringing in Jalen Hurts and Sirianni as the head coach, and obviously they were maybe a refereeing decision away from a Super Bowl this year, and it's I feel sorry for you, Andrew. Obviously Philly sports is in a very unique place in this day and age.
yes, it is better than not making it to the final, but it stings. But I will take that sting over 2015 when none of the Philly teams made the playoffs. So
Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine that. Yeah, it's night and day.
yes.
But yeah, is there anything else on your mind, Andrew? I'm trying to think.
Not really. Do you have anything else?
No, I mean, I was mainly just thinking about the Major League Baseball and the NHL trade deadline. But it's a really good daily show. Again, I'm sorry for you and for everyone for it being a little later in the day. It's been a hectic Ash Wednesday for me. You could probably see I have some remnants of ashes up there. But yeah, it's been. I mean, it's
that was my
but-
alarm for my alarm.
oh
recording this at the right time.
Yeah. No, well, it's good timing because I think that's all I've got. And to everyone watching, this will be on the YouTube also. I'll make a post for it. It'll be on the website. And again, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. It was great having some time to chat with you. And again, good luck with your semester. I'm sure I'll be talking to you soon.
Of course, same to you.
Thank you. And everyone, have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow, and probably not the two of us, but another two people on The Daily Show.